Hello my friends.
We are infinitely grateful
to meet you at Castle Nathria.
Today we want to talk about the pros and cons of the Murder at Castle Nathria expansion.
But before we start, let's try to define what criteria are critical for the success of new expansion.
What do you consider the most important for you? Maybe you're expecting a healthier environment for professional competitive play, or maybe you just want a balance between classes and archetypes. Perhaps the most important thing for you is the emergence of new archetypes or support for the strategies from previous expansions. Also, perhaps you consider the theme, design and unique mechanics, or maybe the main thing you expect from the new expansion is unbridled fun.
The fact is that for each player, the ideal expansion looks different, and may conflict with other important criteria. For example, a healthy competitive meta doesn't have to be fun, and contain new archetypes. Despite this, the main task of Team 5 is to satisfy each of these criteria.
So how does Murder at Castle Nathria meet those criteria? Let's start with dry data. According to the results of the first week after the release, the players managed to find a place for 94 new cards in the metagame. In other words, 40 cards were unsuitable for building standard decks. These figures are usual for the second expansion of the year. The overall popularity of the cards was 24%. In other words, almost every fourth card in the metagame is new. Nerfs and buffs had minimal impact on this data. In terms of value, Murder at Castle Nathria is the most popular set right now and also the best set to buy.
Prince Renathal is an almost mandatory card for most mid-range and control archetypes. Nearly 45% of decks are willing to add an extra 10 cards for an extra 10 hit points. Increasing hit points from 30 to 40, gained without any effort or investment of resources, is too unbalanced an effect that provokes the formation of a control metagame and a restriction of diversity. Aggro archetypes are extremely difficult to counter with improved opponents. It's no surprise that at the last Grandmasters tournament, half of the decks contained this legendary card.
Such a high popularity of Prince Renathal, also the lack of aggressive opposition and the uselessness of buffs led to the formation of an extremely one-sided meta.
The standard meta is 2 rock paper scissors. The best tools against Ramp Druid are Aggro Druid and Imp Warlock, but they are beaten by Skeleton Mage and Quest Priest, who are in turn beaten by Ramp Druid. Add to this the out-of-control Miracle Rogue, which gets stronger at higher ranks, and you have an almost complete picture of the current metagame. All this leads to an imbalance of classes, which negatively affects the variability. The total popularity of the Mage, Druid and Rogue is above 50%. In most cases, you will be forced to play against the same decks.
Murder at Castle Nathria contains a fairly large number of powerful cards that can be good in different strategies. Over the years, Blizzard tried to combat this phenomenon. They tried to differentiate the archetypes of each class as much as possible and reduce the influence of neutral cards. This helped to feel the game for different classes and the archetype in the most different way. In this expansion, most classes received very versatile new tools, powerful enough for several strategies.
Each Hearthstone set contains 10 cards for each class, among which are tools for implementing at least 2 different concepts that can form new archetypes. In an ideal universe, we could get 20 competitive decks, but in reality, it's not that simple.
Most often, one of the presented strategies is much weaker than the second. Moreover, sometimes both strategies are almost incompetitive. Legendary cards demonstrate the intent of the developers very well. For example, the main mechanics of Demon Hunter in this expansion are the relic strategy and cards with the shuffle keyword, which became the core for the new version of the aggro archetype. The buffs improved the situation a little for the relic archetype, but at the same time proved to be almost useless for the aggro strategy. The buffs also failed to help the Paladin's pure and recruit strategies become more effective. Warrior was also unlucky. The buffs couldn't make the rush and enrage archetypes good enough. Deathrattle Druid, Secret Mage, Thief Priest and Totem Shaman are too weak for today. Separately, I want to talk about the best new archetypes. The core of Ramp Druid is the new support for Nature Synergy. Skeleton Mage managed to become the most popular deck after a minor nerf of Imp Warlock. At the same time, Imp Warlock is the most popular aggro archetype. The main new archetype for the Rogue was Secret Archetype, but the new secrets were too weak. At the same time, Necrolord Draka is good enough to bring Miracle Rogue back to life. Evolve Shaman are quite competitive at low ranks. The new cards did not allow the Hunter to get any new archetypes, but they were successfully absorbed into the old decks, which helped to make them more fresh.
In total, out of 20 potential new strategies, we got only 4 new archetypes that can be called Tier 2 decks. The only Tier 1 deck right now is the old, Aggro Druid. 2 more new archetypes have an efficiency just below 50%. These are Evolve Shaman and Relic Demon Hunter. The 5 archetypes are Tier 4 decks. The rest of the new archetypes have too low efficiency even at low ranks. If you want to play effectively, then you have too little choice among completely new strategies. At the same time, many new cards allowed the old decks to evolve.
It is also worth noting that the new expansion had a minimal impact on the wild format. Notable new decks are Totem Shaman and a new version of Secret Mage.
In our opinion, this add-on has flaws in the field of game design, which even such an extensive balance patch did not fix. Paladins, Demon Hunters and Warriors still don't have effective archetypes at all. Buffs have hardly changed things and it's very sad. Blizzard initially made serious mistakes when designing many of the new archetypes. If the original design is weak, the buffs won't fix the situation.
After the balance changes, we followed the 3rd week of Grandmasters. Here are some of our observations. In addition to the outsider classes, the tournament also did not feature Shaman decks. Almost every participant chose the Ramp Druid and Miracle Rogue decks for battles. These 2 decks were most often sent to the ban by opponents. The 3rd most popular class was the Mage, which was represented by the Skeleton and Big Spell archetypes. As a result, for 3 days we watched an extremely monotonous confrontation with a fairly large number of mirror battles. The 4th final week was a little more varied, although the main favorites remained the same.
Another problem with Murder at Castle Nathria is the high concentration of finishers in the matter. A finisher is a card or a combination of several cards that can deal explosive damage to an opponent in one turn.
An important fact, this type of card has always been an integral part of Hearthstone. In classic Hearthstone, the finishers served a very important mission. They did not allow the matches to go on for too long. But this approach has one serious drawback. Given the control meta and the presence of finishers in most control decks, the player who finds their finisher first will most often win. In other words, your matches may be like a coin toss. The lucky player will win, and his skill will have minimal impact on the outcome. The top finishers in the current metagame are Sire Denathrius, Kel'Thuzad and Necrolord Draka.
But there is another very important nuance. In classic Hearthstone, finishers could deal a strictly defined amount of damage. If your opponent hasn't lost enough hit points, you didn't have the conditions to win even with a finisher in hand. Modern finishers are capable of dealing an unlimited amount of damage. Moreover, in combination with Kel'Thas and Bran, the damage will be doubled. If the popularity of decks with these cards decreases significantly, their negative impact on the metagame will be minimized. But at the moment this is a serious problem that has an extremely negative impact on competitive play.
But the developers have provided a tool that can withstand finishers.
Theotar the Mad Duke is the most annoying card in the new expansion. The ability to access cards in an opponent's hand and take one of them is completely broken. Even if you have 9 cards in your hand, in 33% of cases the enemy can steal away your main advantage. This minion has become the most popular card in the Grandmasters tournament. There has never been a basic way in Hearthstone to strip an opponent of cards from their hand and thus completely ruin their game plan. Although the players have always had enough tools to delay the implementation of the opponent's plans. Since the release of Mutanus, Team 5 has been increasingly experimenting with this mechanic. In our opinion, it's better to get rid of imbalanced finishers instead of introducing cards that allow you to rummage in your opponent's hand.
Of course, it's very fun to deprive an opponent of an important tool, but it's extremely annoying when an opponent breaks your game. Moreover, such cards destroy the original rules of Hearthstone.
By the way, using our algorithm, we are testing cards and effects that existed in the alpha version of the game. We are trying to define the original rules of Hearthstone gameplay, as well as give them a numerical value. It came as a surprise to us that several cards had the ability to affect the cards in the opponent's hand. Fortunately, in the final version of the game, the developers got rid of this mechanic.
I wonder, why ideas that were not good enough during alpha testing are being implemented now?
The last hope for the situation to improve is a nerf which will happen in a couple of days. Blizzard will have to make some very drastic changes to significantly change the current situation. But are they ready for it? If nerfs don't help again, then we'll have to wait for the mini-set, which in about a month will add 35 new cards to the game. Once again, we have the impression that some important cards were removed from the main expansion and artificially transferred to the mini-set. In order for the new archetypes to work properly, they need some powerful new tools.
But we as always, have doubts that Team 5 creating add-ons was able to predict the matter and create cards that do not aggravate the current situation, but improve it.
The last factor we want to talk about is the design and narrative of the new expansion. Blizzard has done an amazing job in this area. Cool concept, intriguing plot and charismatic characters. The new mechanics fit perfectly with the theme of the expansion. Despite the negative consequences, many new legendary characters have the potential to become iconic characters for Hearthstone history. Can't wait for new plot details in the new chapter of the Book of Heroes. We will get it, right? The only drawback for me is the lack of additional cinematic trailers. It would be great to get more animated videos.
Let's move on to the conclusions. In our opinion, we got a very cool expansion in terms of narrative and design, which deserves 5 stars from us. Unfortunately, we didn't manage to get enough new viable archetypes, but at the same time, new cards were able to evolve old mechanics. For these factors, we gave the expansion 2 and 4 stars respectively.
The current balance is far from ideal, and numerous buffs had almost no effect on the metagame. In our opinion, this has had a negative impact on the professional competitive scene.
Sorry Blizzard, for the balance we will give only 3 stars from our team.
After the first month, the current meta became too boring for us. So, our overall rating for the Murder at Castle Nathria expansion is currently 3.4 stars out of 5.
Despite the low-end result, I feel like this is a potentially very good expansion that just needed a few more important changes to make it much better.
What do you think? How would you rate the new Hearthstone expansion? Share your impressions in the comments and also vote on our community tab.
It's all for today. As always, we would like to express our huge gratitude to our patrons.
Dear friends, your support is incredibly important to us. Many thanks to each of you for your help.
We hope to be able to get in touch in the future. Take care of yourself.
And good luck.
Job's done.
You cannot tame rage, dwarf.
I've got you now!
I knew it. There is too much softness and kindness inside you.
Your history!
Are you provoking me? Enraging!
3 plague lords have fallen. But it's not over yet!